You ever taken a shot of something like a snow scene and wondered why the image came out all wishy-washy and grey and muddy rather than the bright, white, dramatic scene you were expecting? Or shot something at night and rather than the dark and moody image you were hoping for, it all came out kind of washed out in the middle of the road? Well, stick with me whilst I explain how your camera's meter can easily be fooled and how you can learn to outsmart it. Modern cameras are quite insanely powerful and clever. I started my photographic journey way back in 1991 and my camera had a meter and an aperture priority mode. That was it. No autofocus, no program mode, and it took these funny smelly little canisters rather than memory cards. Something I really struggled with to start with was understanding how the camera meter worked and getting my exposures right. Now, the way a camera's meter works is it tries to assume that everything it's looking at is a perfect mix of tones, what's called 18% grey. There is 18% grey. Exciting, isn't it? No matter what metering mode you're using, whether it's old-fashioned centre-weighted, spot metering or some modern matrix zone colour system, they're all trying to do this just by measuring different parts of the frame and in different ways and giving different weight to them. Now, if the scene you're photographing happens to be pretty close to this perfect 18% grey, winner, you're onto a good thing. If you take a shot of a field of grass, you'll probably be bang on, although you're not allowed to win any awards. Lots of other scenes, though, will confuse even the smartest meter as it seeks to bring the exposure back to an average. Now, I'm not going to dive into the depths of dynamic range, contrast, various bits and pieces like that. This is just a quick tip. We're going to stick to how your meter gets fooled and how you can outsmart it. Bearing in mind exposure is quite a big topic, and if you want more depth you should check out one of my technical courses at photosmudger.teachable.com, where you'll find lots more info you need to know and you can go as deep as you like. You see, when your meter sees a scene that's very far from average, rather than record it accurately and choose an exposure that reflects the fact the scene may be way darker or lighter than 18%, it tries to bring the exposure back to average. Now, this means in practice it tries to make bright scenes darker and dark scenes brighter. It tries to bring them back to that average point. So to counter this, if you're on some sort of automatic exposure mode, you need to use exposure compensation to force your camera to actually give more or less exposure than it intends to. Scenes that are bright need more exposure, and scenes that are dark need less exposure. Now, the exact amount you need will depend on the shot in question, but as a very rough guide, and it is only a very rough guide, something like that snow scene could need as much as 1 2/3, even 2 stops more exposure, and a night scene as much in the other direction. Do remember to bring exposure compensation back to what you normally have it at when you finish shooting scenes like this though, otherwise your normal shots will look really bright or really dark. Now, you may find your meter gets fooled even when the whole shot isn't predominantly dark or light. There just happens to be a very dominant dark or light area in the frame. The classic example for me was always a landscape shot with a lot of sky. Even modern metering systems struggle with this quite a bit, I've found, as the brightness of the sky is so much higher than the ground, and so the meter tries to darken the whole scene down. And the result is an image that looks very dark and muddy, with very, very little detail in the landscape itself, but perhaps some detail in the sky. The same can happen with sunsets that you may want to actually silhouette. The meter will try and give you detail in the foreground, so you'll end up with washed out colours in the sky and grey shapes in the foreground rather than nice punchy sky with simple dark blocks of shape. Now, you can, if you prefer, use exposure lock rather than exposure compensation to convince your meter to go the other way, but that does rely on finding something that you can accurately read an exposure off in the scene. Now, way back in the day I used to do the old-fashioned trick of carrying a grey card and holding that grey card up in the exact light of the scene, taking an exposure reader from it, and then locking it in and shooting the scene properly. Now, that's a bit long-winded though, and these days I find a combination of exposure compensation and then chimping the shot and histogram checking to be much more efficient. Now, of course, you can use manual mode, which I do the vast majority of the time, but even then you'll probably still have a meter readout in the viewfinder and you may still want to be paying attention to it. There's no point ignoring it completely. You just might have the extra confidence to know that if it's telling you should be, nearly 2 stops in the other direction, but you know enough to know that you're looking at a bright scene or a dark scene and you can override it. So that is how your meter gets fooled. it tries to make bright scenes darker and dark scenes brighter. Simply reverse this process to get the look of the shot you want. Hope that was helpful. If you want much more detailed technical insights, head over to my site at photosmudger.teachable.com, where there are full in-depth technical courses. Meanwhile, like, subscribe, comment, etc. as you see fit. See you soon.